A. Milne wrote, "If there ever comes a day when we can't be together, keep me in your heart. I'll stay there forever." Having to say goodbye to someone you love is always difficult. I'm Pastor Mike, and I want to thank you on behalf of Manhattan Beach Community Church and Kyle's family for coming today in this cold, rainy weather to celebrate Kyle's life. More than any words can say, your presence here provides strength and comfort to Kyle's family and all who gather in his memory. We're going to hear some beautiful words, a very well-written eulogy from Kyle's daughter Lori, and we'll also hear from several remembrances offered by some of those who are nearest and dearest to Kyle. So may the gift of music and scripture and photos and shared memories today touch each of you in the deepest places of your heart, where Kyle will stay, no doubt, forever. Would you pray with me? God who creates and recreates us, God who laughs with us and weeps with us, God who walks with us each step of the way, carrying us when our strength fails, we gather today with hearts breaking with grief. And so we ask that you move in and around us today as we gather to remember and say goodbye to Kyle. Be the shoulder we can cry on. Be the arm we can lean on. Help us to see through the veil of tears that there is hope for life continuing. Gracious God, as mysterious and wondrous as you are also a compassionate God, as attentive as a hen with her chicks, as tender as a mother with a newborn child, as watchful as a shepherd with the sheep, as protective as a father's warm embrace. And so we come into your presence to grieve Kyle's death, asking that your Holy Spirit will be here to ease the pain. As we give thanks for all that Kyle added to the lives of those around him, as we release our tears and anger, as we say goodbyes, remind us, Lord, that we are not alone. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. Those who are able are invited to stand and sing hymn number 53, "Morning Has Broken." Matthew Miller will be sharing.
Good afternoon. I'm Matthew Miller, and Kyle was my grandpa. He often teased me that I should only call him grandfather, but my sister and I just called him Grandpa K. When my family asked me if I wanted to speak at the service, I thought immediately of my top 5 favorite things about Grandpa K. Number 5, he was a lefty. Let's go lefties. Number 4, he was super smart. Number 3, he was an enthusiastic golfer. Number 2, he was very funny. And my number 1 favorite thing was that he always made the best milkshakes. He was an absolute master of the blender. And now, I'd like to introduce my sister, Grace Miller.
Good afternoon. I'd like to read you the 23rd Psalm from the English Standard Version of the Bible, which was one of Grandpa K's favorites. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He makes me lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside still waters. He restores my soul. He leads me in paths of righteousness for his name's sake. Even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for you are with me. Your rod and your staff, they comfort me. You prepare a table before me in the presence of my enemies. You anoint my head with oil, my cup overflows. Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life, and I shall dwell in the house of the Lord forever. My grandfather had a passion for both music and poetry. One poem in particular that he had memorized as a small child and often repeated was The Road Not Taken by Robert Frost. From an early age, it appealed to him as a meditation on considered choices, living fully, thoughtfully, and without regrets. The road not taken. 2 roads diverged in a yellow wood, and sorry I could not travel both. And be one traveler, long I stood, and looked down one as far as I could, to where it bent in the undergrowth, then took the other just as fair, and perhaps having better claim, because it was grassy and wanted wear. Though as for that passing there, had really warned them about the same, and that morning equally lay, in leaves no step had trodden black, oh, I kept the first for another day. Yet knowing how way leads on to way, I doubted if I should ever come back. I shall be telling this with a sigh, somewhere ages and ages hence. 2 roads diverged in a wood, and I took the one less traveled by, and that has made all the difference.
Thank you. At this time, the choir will come up and sing. This time, Lori Miller is going to share the eulogy.
Good afternoon. Our story begins in a very small town in southeastern Montana called Miles City, where Kyle David Brown was born. Dad's beloved parents, Jean and Rainey Brown, had both grown up in Miles City. But after they married and were blessed with their baby boy, they decided they'd had enough of that tiny railroad town, and they set off with baby Kyle for a better life in a bigger city, which would have been almost any city. They ended up in Los Angeles, where they welcomed Dad's little sister, Judy. Dad was named for a popular sportscaster, and true to his name, Kyle loved sports of every kind. But Dad declined an offer to play professional baseball, preferring to attend college. Among the scholarship offers he received were both a full-ride athletic scholarship to USC and a full-ride academic scholarship to USC. He chose the academic scholarship because, as he told me many times, getting straight A's is easy, hitting home runs is hard. Nevertheless, Dad walked on to the USC baseball team, where he played for their famous coach, Rod Dado, and won a national championship. In later years, we'd often run into Coach Dado at SC functions, where he'd call out to Dad with his famous greeting, "Hey, Tiger!" While in law school, Dad and several of his SC classmates were recruited by the Hermosa Beach Police Department to serve as police officers. Local enforcement agencies thought law students would make great cops, and it would be a meaningful way for them to understand law and police work later in life. Writing for the Law Review by day and patrolling the mean streets of Hermosa Beach by night led to stories of those years which became legendary. It was about this time that Dad first met my mom, Sue. Mom's longtime best friend was dating Dad's longtime best friend, and Sue and Kyle were soon set up on a date. But dating is expensive business, especially when you're dating a Bruin Belle from Brentwood. So, looking for extra cash perhaps, one day on campus, Dad saw an ad inviting students to audition for television game shows. He auditioned for the show You Don't Say, where he was teamed with the lovely young starlet Mary Tyler Moore, and then won over $2,000 and a brand new car. Now Mom really began to take an interest in this sports-crazy, law review writing police officer guy. Mom and Dad were married on December 5th, 1964, in Mount Olive Lutheran Church in Santa Monica before 400 friends and family. They started their new life together in Manhattan Beach. But married life did not dim any excitement for sports. Apart from baseball and basketball and tennis, Dad's true joy was golf. He played courses all over California, throughout the US, and overseas. He carded 3 hole-in-ones over the years and was as excited as a kid on Christmas morning to play a new course. One of the things that always amazed me about my dad was his boundless energy. When Chris and I were growing up, Dad insisted on season tickets to the LA Dodgers, season tickets to USC basketball, season tickets to the Universal Amphitheater, season tickets to the LA Philharmonic, and of course, season tickets to USC football. All of this was in addition to the many concerts, plays, and charity functions that were always on the agenda. Between work and play, I could never figure out when he found the time to sleep. The story continues with Mom and Dad enjoying lots of travel, from London to Leningrad and every point in between. But coming back to Hawaii was always their favorite. So many of our happiest memories are of family trips to the islands. Dad loved hitting the links with Chris and Darren, snorkeling with the grandkids, and sipping Mai Tais at sunset, watching the Eow Man with Mom. Since the late 70s, my parents have been involved here at NBCC. A respected speaker, my dad was often asked to assist in Sunday services, and every year he was asked to deliver a lay Sunday sermon. Dad would joke each time that they had to stop asking him, as he had run through all his good ideas for sermons, to which his close friend, Reverend Calhoun, would reply, "I've heard all your sermons. What makes you think you had good ideas?" I believe it's in remembering these stories and in sharing them that we will continue to write Dad's story.
Shadows are falling and I'm running out of breath. Keep me in your heart for a while. If I leave you, it doesn't mean I love you any less. Keep me in your heart for a while. When you get up in the morning and you see that crazy sun, keep me in your heart.
have remembrances from Jana, Jim, and Jim.
Good afternoon. My name is Jana, and I'm Kyle Brown's niece. My mother is his little sister, Judy. And my perspective of the Kyle Brown story takes place in the waning days of the Eisenhower administration, while Uncle Kyle was still living at home and attending USC. It must have been quite the unforeseen pleasure when his sister Judy brought this baby home from the hospital to our little house in El Segundo. We became an instant family of 5: Mom, Kyle, Grandma, Grandpa, and me. Kyle recently told me that I had been like his niece and his little baby sister. Kyle's attentive and loving presence meant the world to me. I have vivid memories of those days. Gramps built Kyle a room onto the side of our garage, and if you went out there, you can't believe the amount of sports equipment and trophies. You would not believe it. There was also a ukulele, tons of golf tees, and if you've had a chance to look at the You Don't Say episode that Lori alluded to that Chris posted on Facebook, go to Chris's Facebook page, not now, obviously, but you know, and check it out. That was the young man that I was interacting with. It was just such a strange miracle that that suddenly surfaced, because that's the guy, that was the dude. To be babysat by Kyle in those days was quite the adventure. The grown-ups would roll my crib out to his room where we liked to read and sing. Kyle taught me songs like Where Have All the Flowers Gone, Sloop John B., and MTA by the Kingston Trio. And in later years, we covered Bob Dylan, Simon and Garfunkel, Meatloaf, and countless others. It was imperative to Kyle that you thoroughly got specific sections of these songs. I mean, he would stare at your face and make sure that you felt it and heard it exactly the way he did. His favorite way to express himself, obviously, was through music and sports and all kinds of other sports like debate that he picked up later on. And a few years ago, this happened. I found myself walking through the streets of London in October, and it was all decorated up for Halloween, and out loud, I'm walking around singing Warren Zevon's Werewolves of London. And yes, I look like an idiot, but I was thinking about Kyle, and I couldn't stop myself because his musical enthusiasm had somehow gotten under my skin. When I was very young, he would take me down to our beach, which in those days was El Porto, and he would throw me into waves and teach me how to body surf, yelling 1, 2, 3, go. And I still hear his voice and timing in my head when I'm in the ocean. Kyle came from exceedingly gifted parents and an exceedingly gifted family in general. His parents' lives, however, were very derailed by the Depression. His mother had a genius IQ, who wrote poetry and had a firm grasp of Latin. He had an uncle who had been a Rhodes Scholar and studied at Oxford. In 1931, after his dad, Gene Brown, graduated at age 17 early from Custer County High School in Miles City, Montana, at the top of his class, he was awarded the National Merit Scholarship with a full ride to the dental school of his choice. But Gene Brown didn't go. Instead, he gifted his scholarship money to his mother. This was Grandma Brown's church, his mother's church, when she first moved to California, little as an aside there. But he gifted his money to his mother to pay for his brother's funeral expenses. I think Kyle felt really fortunate for the opportunities that he had, that his own father had been denied or given up at will. He certainly was determined to live life to its fullest. Kyle and his dad were a lot alike. They shared the same sense of humor, an ethical integrity, a type of gravitas. And in my early years, Kyle and all the grown-ups would sit around after dinner reciting poetry. And Grace, I can't believe you brought up that Robert Frost poem, because I actually had it written down in here. Gramps would recite Evangeline. Grandma would recite the Song of Hiawatha. My mother, Judy, knew all 27 stanzas of The Raven by heart. And they all had a love of language and a reverence for both the spoken word and the written word. When they weren't reciting poetry, they were playing poker for pennies, and their laughter made it absolutely impossible for me to get any sleep. Aunt Helen describes Kyle as a remarkably loving little boy who loved to hug you. His mom, Rainey, described young Kyle as a highly sensitive child, and she became concerned after he had skipped a few grades because of the social minefields he might have to navigate as a very young boy amongst really older kids. I can't personally imagine starting middle school at age 10. High school for me was challenging enough at 15, but I can't imagine what it was like for high school at 12 for Kyle. Kyle certainly denied any difficulties. He would never have admitted it, even if there had been any. But he developed a habit of being a very careful thinker. And he would always pause for a moment and formulate an opinion before he opened his mouth and actually spoke it. Kyle was extremely fascinated by many topics, and he chose law kind of almost by accident when a high school counselor suggested it might be a good fit for someone who enjoyed English and history. It wasn't until law school that Kyle picked up the sport of debating at the family dinner table. And it was the mid-'60s, so there were some topics. There were eye rolls from the other grown-ups, but I'm pretty sure, even though he argued every point, eventually they adapted. And I will absolutely never forget the day he brought the most beautiful girl I'd ever seen home, my Aunt Sue. We had heard all about her before she arrived. Something about a bikini, but I won't go there. He was so in love. He just walked around completely with his head in the clouds for the longest time. And I was so thrilled when she asked me to be a flower girl in their big wedding of 400 people. I felt fortunate to be included. I felt fortunate to get to go to Hawaii with them, watching the EL Man. And we had close to 40 Christmas mornings together until I moved away. And Kyle was the one person that I could always talk to, and he was there for me during my very darkest moments. I'll sum up with a story of the night Kyle was born. The way my grandfather tells it, there was a local musician who played a song in Kyle's honor. This was at a bar, of course, because they were Browns. And Gramps had learned that he had just had a baby boy, and he was so excited, and so he made the announcement. And this local musician played a song. And Gramps wrote down on a cocktail napkin Kyle's song, and he sang that song to Kyle. And 20 years later, he sang that song to me, and I've sung it to all my children. So on a whim, I Googled it. I don't know why I know the song. And there were 2 missing verses that Kyle never heard. And since his father sang him that song, the full thing, on the day he was born, please forgive my terrible voice while I introduce him to the last 2 verses. And when he lays his head Upon his pillow so white, I pray the Lord above to guide him safe through the night. In dreams I see his face and feel his fond embrace. There's no one can replace that little boy of mine.
Good afternoon. I'm Jim Bowles. I practiced law with Kyle for over 40 years. Kyle was my mentor, my boss, and he was a very fine boss. He was also one of my best friends. He just gave me so much. I want to thank Sue and the family for asking me to speak today, because I loved Kyle so much. Kyle wasn't so much a father figure to me as a really cool older brother. He just was wise and kind, and he always knew what to do, and he gave me a lot of great advice and really helped me in my career. Most of you already know what an extraordinary man Kyle was. I wanted to share a few stories with you that perhaps you don't know. As you heard from Jana, that Kyle was brilliant from the start. What you may not know is he graduated from high school twice. He has 2 high school diplomas, and he walked in graduation twice. You say, how could that be, Jim? Well, he graduated the first time he was so young, and he was a great baseball player. And the coaches thought he was too young to play college ball at such a young age. But the athletic officials weren't going to let him play a second year because he'd already graduated. But his coaches talked them into it, because they said by the time he graduates the second time, he'll still be one of the youngest varsity players. So he went on, as you heard, to USC on an academic scholarship, and the great Coach Dado was happy to have him because he didn't have to use one of his athletic scholarships for Kyle's position. And Coach Dado knew how smart Kyle was, because later Coach Dado retained Kyle when Kyle was an attorney to represent his trucking company, Dart Transportation. Kyle was so gifted, he got a scholarship to law school, which is very difficult to do, and he was Order of the Coif and Law Review at USC. Kyle was always grateful to USC, both for his undergraduate and law degree, and he was very generous to the school. And as all of you who know Kyle, every Saturday in the fall, he was watching USC football, either in person or on TV. As you heard from Jana, is in law school as a summer job, and during the year, Kyle and some of his buddies were cadets for the Hermosa Police Department. But what you may not have heard is Kyle and John Shirosky, who later became the chief judge of the Compton Superior Court and was one of Kyle's good friends, they arrested a guy breaking into John's car near USC Law School. And the only problem was when they turned over the criminal to the LAPD, they were in LAPD's jurisdiction, and LAPD wasn't real happy about the Hermosa Beach police cadets arresting somebody in Los Angeles. So Kyle and John told him, if you guys were doing your job, we wouldn't have to be arresting guys around here. In 1979, I joined our law firm, Hill, Fair & Burrell, and Kyle was my mentor and role model, but not just for me, but for many. And as I said, he was such a role model to me. At one point, I had the same accountant, doctor, and tailor as Kyle did. Kyle made everything he did look easy. I used to watch him do the crossword puzzle, of course left-handed, in about 10 minutes, and he did it in ink. And I said, Kyle, how do you do that? And he goes, Jim, you get better with practice. And then one time I came over to his house, and he was older, and he was shooting free throws in the backyard. And he hit 10 in a row. And I said, Kyle, you just hit 10 free throws in a row. He said, Jim, that's why they call them free throws. He made it look easy, and he won nearly all of his cases. In 40 years as a trial lawyer, I only remember him losing 2 cases. But one of them was my first case. And Kyle had done me the honor of allowing me to prepare this key witness. The case turned on what a security guard had said to some strikers, and the security guard only spoke Spanish. So I speak Spanish, so I had prepared the security guard. And he was fine when we did the run-through, but when he took the witness stand, it was a disaster. The security guard was stoned out of his mind, and he started speaking gibberish. And I couldn't lead the witness because he was our witness, and the judge took over the examination of the witness and got him to confess to a bunch of things that he hadn't done, and we lost the case. So I blame myself, but Kyle was so kind. He told me, Jim, it's not your fault. He says, you weren't the one who was stoned. And he said, you know, Jim, you got to learn something. You don't control everything that goes on in the courtroom, and you don't control everything that goes on in your life. So, that was a really good lesson for a young attorney to learn. Kyle had a great legal career. As I told you, he won nearly all of his cases, but he was active with our firm. He was managing partner of our law firm, and he was chairman of our labor and employment department for years. But Kyle's crowning achievement was his family. He loved all of you just so much. He was so proud of you, Sue, and your jewelry business, and Lori with your real estate business, and Chris with the surfing school. He was just so proud of you guys. And he loved your family vacations. He loved it when you guys were all together. That's what he loved the most. But he would keep me up to date on the grandchildren. And he would tell me, Grace and Matthew, what you guys were up to, and even what little Taylor was up to when he came along. So many of Kyle's proteges are in the audience today. We come here to honor Kyle and to thank him for all he did for us and for our law firm. We were very fortunate to have Kyle in our lives. Thank you.
I'm Jim Miller. Good afternoon. One of my very first remembrances of Kyle was him standing right here. And my take on this place, this lectern, that pulpit, is that this is hallowed space. This was back when John Calhoun, the wonderful John Calhoun, was the pastor at this church. And Kyle was John's cherished friend and advisor and sometimes lawyer. And that relationship was such, as you heard, that at times when John could not be here, he entrusted this church to Kyle Brown. I think that says just about everything. Kyle could so effectively speak before this church because Kyle was an extraordinary man. A husband to Sue, father to Lori and Chris, a grandfather to Gracie, Matt, and Taylor. A loving and devoted family man. He had friends for all of his life. That's what a special man Kyle Brown was. I was one of the newer friends. We were only close friends for 47 years. There are a number of friends of Kyle's here today that were friends of his for over 70 years. Kyle was the highest of intellects. He defined intelligence, brilliant writer, speaker, student, teacher. You've heard, a lawyer of the highest order, a true athlete, great baseball player, as you've heard, phenomenal sports fan for all the USC teams, for the Dodgers, for the Lakers. Kyle Brown, such an important member of this church and such a wonderful, distinguished, intelligent man, was a man for all seasons. A man for all seasons who was the definition of integrity, intelligence, morality, and belief and commitment to the principles of Christianity. So he deserved his role in this church. And then, with a little bit of tongue-in-cheek, Kyle became, for me, someone I frequently referred to as the Reverend Kyle Brown. So it was a little bit lighthearted, but then on a very personal side, he being my dear friend, I think really my closest friend, there came a time in his position as the Reverend Kyle Brown that he was central force in two of the most significant events in the history of our family. As Reverend Kyle, he officiated one of the most wonderful days of our lives, our son Jimmy's wedding. Kyle, the Reverend Kyle, was magnificent. And then, in tragedy, some years later, Reverend Kyle led our family in love and caring beyond all measure through the saddest event of our lives, the celebration of life of our son Jimmy on the beach in Manhattan Beach. I suppose if the Reverend Kyle had not been with our family, with me, Nancy, with Jeff, with Alyssa, if he had not been with us at that time of Jimmy's illness and death, we would have somehow survived. But I simply don't know how. What I do know for certain, with the Reverend Brown's love and support and guidance, we did survive and live on. Thank you, Kyle. On the celebration of life side of things and on remembrances of Kyle, I would like to focus on one subject. Jana has already referenced it, but it had everything to do with our friendship and the Brown family friendship with the Millers. That subject is music, and has also been touched on, music as poetry, the lyrics, the stories, the meaning of the music, what I call the soundtrack of Kyle's life. When I first met Kyle in the mid-1970s, my interest in music were, what I admit, were pretty pedestrian, pretty limited. I grew up on folk music and acoustic guitars, and I went to high school in the 60s, so of course the Beatles and the Rolling Stones and the British Invasion. I quickly learned that Kyle was a huge fan of music, with truly expansive tastes and interests. And I also learned he wasn't just an ordinary fan, again, as Jana has pointed out. He experienced music as it was or what it could be, the story, the philosophy, the music as a learning experience. And so through Kyle, I discovered a lot of new music and new stories and new emotions. And with Kyle, music was an adventure. And from the start, that was the start of an adventure. Now, let me point out that if you were enjoying music with Kyle and you dare to sing along with the lyrics, you better not try any of that sort of loosey-goosey stuff, maybe covering up you didn't really know the lyrics, maybe mumbling a little bit. Now, Kyle, not in a sarcastic way, and certainly not in a mean way. He'd simply point out to you what the lyrics were and why it was important to know what the lyrics were, and he knew every single lyric, and he had a phenomenal memory, and so from Kyle, you would learn the lyrics. And it was a better idea to learn them and not mumble them and not pretend. It all started with Kyle introducing me to one Bruce Springsteen. And with Kyle, it wasn't just the beat, the rock and roll, it was the stories and the lessons. And we went on to experience so many Springsteen concerts, most of them at the sports arena, right in the neighborhood, right next door to his beloved USC. As we know, Kyle was born in Montana, and there's no place more American than Montana. And then he grew up in Los Angeles in the post-war boom times, the times of opportunity in the area. In seeming to talk to Kyle, Springsteen wrote, "Born in the USA. I was born in the USA." And that became an anthem of our friendship. And then in a more nuanced story about having moved to Los Angeles in the land of opportunity, Springsteen called to Kyle with the land of hope and dreams. Springsteen wrote, "Well, I will provide for you, and I'll stand by your side. You'll need a good companion now for this part of the ride. Yeah, leave behind your sorrows. Let this day be the last. Well, tomorrow there'll be sunshine and all this darkness past." We're not just going to talk about the music, we're going to hear it.
Thunder's rolling down this track. Well, you don't know where
And then Kyle introduced me to Jackson Browne. We went to so many Jackson Browne concerts, I totally lost track. Kyle didn't lose track of a single one. He remembered every single concert and every single playlist. We went to see Jackson at the Greek Theater and out in Thousand Oaks. And Thousand Oaks, Jackson came out to do a totally solo performance with 24 guitars. And we saw Jackson at the Shrine Auditorium doing a charity gig with Springsteen and Bonnie Raitt. And then Jackson came to the Hermosa Auditorium, and we really appreciated him coming and seeing us instead of us traveling to see him. And on the remembrance side, 1980, Kyle and I, just on our own, went to the Hold On, Hold Out concert at the Forum. We had a blast and came back, and I had a Chevy van at that time and parked outside of the house and turned on the stereo to the highest possible volume, and we listened to the whole Hold On, Hold Out album again, to the delight of our neighbors, of course. It was midnight, and these two guys are out there playing the... Jackson was with us till the end. 3 months before Kyle passed, he was reclining at home and unable to go out to concerts. I told him that Nancy and I were going to see Jackson at the Greek Theater. Kyle said he really wanted to know if Jackson would play Barricades of Heaven. We were able to report back that Jackson, in fact, played Barricades of Heaven. Kyle, pardon the pun, without missing a beat, he's right there and he starts repeating the lyrics, the poetry, the inspiration of Barricades of Heaven. Childhood comes to me at night, voices of my friends, your face bathing in the light, hope that never ends, pages turning, pages torn, and pages burning, faded pages open in the sun. Better bring your own redemption when you come to the barricades of heaven where I'm from.
Childhood comes for me at night. Voices of my friends, your face bathing me in light. Hope that never ends.
Then came a time when Kyle introduced me to Warren Zevon, and we've heard from Warren already this afternoon. But there's one very short poem from Warren's lyrics. Kyle would never quote this about himself, but it so aptly applied to those who needed Kyle's brilliant help. And there came a time when I needed Kyle's brilliant help as an attorney, and it was brilliant. And the lyrics, pretty simple stuff. In my case, let's call it an analogy. I was gambling in Havana. I took a little risk. Send lawyers, guns, and money, Dad. Get me out of this.
I was gambling in Havana. I took a little risk. Send lawyers, guns, and money. Dad, get me out of this. Ha!
And then there was a whole new music scene that Kyle introduced us to. It was Jimmy Buffett. Kyle, way before anybody else, heard and experienced Jimmy Buffett in a bar in North Carolina in 1972. He was there working on a case, and Kyle became one of the very first parrot heads. And he got the Brown family and the Miller family all engaged in that, and it became an experience that we shared so many times. And we did it upright. Jimmy would come every year to the Irvine Meadows Amphitheater, and we'd get the limousine and load the picnic table up in the trunk. And we went there, and with Kyle's leadership, we all became parrot heads. And once again, the lyrics were a poetry. With these changes in latitudes, changes in attitudes, nothing remains quite the same. With all of my running and all of my cunning, if I couldn't laugh, I would just go insane. And Kyle really taught us that if we couldn't laugh, we would all go insane.
I took off for a weekend last month just to try and recall the whole year. All of the faces and all of the places, wondering where they all disappeared. I didn't ponder the question too long. I was hungry and went out for a bite. Ran into a chum with a bottle of rum, and we wound up drinking all night. It's those changes in latitudes, changes in attitudes, nothing remains quite the same. All of our running and all of our cunning, if we couldn't laugh, we would all go insane.
And then there came a time when I was able to return the favor to Kyle and introduce him to some new music. I'd come across an Irish rock country band on PBS called the Saw Doctors. And they were from the west coast of Ireland. And they came to tour America, and sure enough, we decided to tour along with them. And the Browns and Sue and Nancy and Kyle and I went to so many Saw Doctors performances. And then we took a real excursion. They were going to play at the Telluride, Colorado Bluegrass Festival. So we all got together and included our son Jimmy and went off to Telluride, and it was the most magnificent mountain town and music experience ever. And Kyle and Sue and Nancy and me and Jimmy are sitting at a bar in a cafe, and Jimmy gets up and walks out to go walk on the street. Not very long later, having used his charm, he comes waltzing back in with Leo Moran, co-leader of the band. and Leo became one of our best friends. Kyle ended up doing some legal work for Leo. And the poetry there was so applicable, talking about a real and at the same time mystical island, and for Kyle it could have been Maui or Lanai. They wrote, "Will you meet me on Clare Island? Summer stars are in the sky. We'll get the ferry out from Runa and wave all our cares goodbye."
Will you meet me on Clare Island? Summer stars are in the sky. We get the ferry out from Runa and wave all our cares goodbye. And we go dancing at the Killy. We go kissing on the strand. Take our clothes off in the moonlight, skinny dipping hand in hand. We'll start drinking in the twilight, keep it up until the dawn. Both the bars, because there's no guards, take our names and send us home.
Kyle loved that song so much, I almost thought that there might have been a time when he and Sue went skinny dipping. And then there was another musical adventure with the Browns and the Millers. This wasn't learning new music. This was old, well-known music. We like to celebrate holidays together, and one of the ones we really like to celebrate was St. Patrick's Day. And what better music to celebrate St. Patrick's Day? And in a way, what better music for the celebration of life today than the tried and true and well-known Danny Boy? But it wasn't just a matter of having a little party and having a Danny Boy. We weren't going to listen to something like a Danny Boy. No, we did it up big. And we played, and it started decades-long practice of having St. Patrick's Day together and playing Danny Boys, every version we could find. And we occasionally invited someone else to join us, like our kids, and they would come over, and Kyle and I would just feign amazement that the kids or whoever else we invited over all of a sudden had something else to do on St. Patrick's Day after they'd heard 5 or 10 Danny Boys, not knowing that we still had another 20 or 30 to go. Here's a Danny Boy, so special to us because it's Sue's favorite singer and performance of all. But let me first read the poetry from Danny Boy. When winters come and all the flowers are dying, and I am dead, as dead I well may be, you'll come and find a place that I am lying, and kneel and pray an Ave there for me.
And I'll be here in sunshine or in shadow. Oh, Danny boy, oh, Danny boy, I love you so. But if you come and all the roses dying, and I am dead, as dead I will maybe. You'll come and find the place where I am lying, and kneel and say an Ave there for me, and I shall feel.
And having established Danny Boy for our St. Patrick's Day, what did we have to do for Christmas? Well, we sort of replicated it, and we went right to the tune that Danny Boy referenced. So we started playing Ave Marias at Christmas time. And again, not one or two, no, we'd do 20 or 30. And we'd introduce a new one, and Kyle, amongst all of his intellectual and intelligence experiences, he always knew the answer to the quiz questions, and indeed, he was an absolute champion on Jeopardy. We watched TV Jeopardy shows so often. So one Christmas, the Browns and the Millers are together, and we're playing Aves, and we introduce a new one. Only took Kyle 4 or 5 seconds to recognize who the artist was. Maria Callas, and an Ave for Sue. For the conclusion of our musical adventure, we'll go from the sublime of Danny Boy and Ave Maria for a song with only one word, one lyric, one word of poetry in it. A song that Kyle wouldn't forgive me for if we didn't go to it. Happened to be one of his favorite groups, but his absolutely most favorite band of all time. So the group was Fleetwood Mac, the band was USC Marching Band, and the lyric was Tusk. Okay, I said Tusk was going to be the conclusion. Not quite. We do have a bit of a finale. Now, we've already heard this tune in full before, but again, Kyle so loved Warren Zevon, his intelligence, his poetry, and his story. So we're just going to return to just a little short piece that is so appropriate for today. For Warren Zevon, keep me in your heart for a while.
Sometimes when you're doing simple things around the house, maybe you'll think of me and smile. You know I'm tied to you like the buttons on your blouse. Keep me in your heart for a while. Take me to your dreams, touch me as I fall into view. And when the winter comes, keep the fire headed north to Pleasant Stream. Keep me in your heart for a while. These wheels keep turning, but they're running out of steam. Keep me in your heart for a while.
And then this last December, Kyle gave us what I believe was his final request for music. Nancy and I were visiting with the Brown family. Kyle had gone silent in his hospice bed in the family room. He was no longer speaking, but Kyle was fully with us, with his intellect, his spirit, and love, and sense of humor abounding. It was Christmas time, and as with so many Christmases before, we were all together. I was holding Kyle's hand. Grandson Taylor was doing his gymnastics, climbing up and down on the bed and playing with Grandpa Kyle. Chris was handling the TV, going from Christmas show to Christmas show, bringing up all of our old favorites. Andy Williams, Nat King Cole, Frank Sinatra. Masters of Christmas joy and Christmas music. Kyle firmly squeezed my hand, and as clear could be, he said, "Bob Hope." We heard him. We chattered a bit. Did Kyle just say Bob Hope? And Kyle said it again. Bob Hope. It was something between a request and a command. And Chris jumped to it and found the Bob Hope Christmas special of 1977. Put it on the TV. And it was fun. And it was joyous, and it was Christmas once again at the Browns. We watched and listened to Bob Hope Christmas 1977 for Christmas 2022, Kyle's last Christmas. Only later upon reflection, I thought I understood the meaning of those resounding words from Kyle. Bob Hope. I'm sure he was sending a message, a finale to the soundtrack of his life. Kyle was telling us this from the words and music of Bob Hope.
Thanks for the memory of sentimental verse, nothing in my purse, and chuckles when the preacher said, for better or for worse.
There's an old saying to be paraphrased. No one dies if they are remembered. As we leave Kyle's church today, wherever you go, whatever you are doing, when you hear Kyle's music, when you hear again the soundtrack of his life, Bruce Springsteen, Jackson Brown, Warren Zevon, Jimmy Buffett. If you're traveling to Ireland and hear the Saw Doctors, when you're at a Trojans game and the USC marching band plays Tusk, remember that when you remember Kyle, by your remembrance, Kyle is alive in our hearts and in our memories. I believe Kyle is listening right now. And just as clear as he was in those words, we heard from him. He said, "Thanks for the memory." And we say right back at Kyle, "Thanks for the memories."
Thank you, Jim. After hearing about all this rock and roll and drinking and skinny dipping, I have to say that Reverend had a lot of fun. I wish I had known Kyle. My life could have been a lot more fun. He adored Reverend John Calhoun, who served Manhattan Beach Community Church for over 40 years, and those two had a special bond. John asked Kyle to preach several times, as you heard, and each time he advised Kyle to keep it to 16 minutes. I'm told John never heeded his own advice in that regard. I've read several of Kyle's sermons, and from the looks of it, he didn't heed John's advice either. And Jim, you certainly didn't. We were at a Super Bowl party the other day, and he goes, "How long do you think I can be?" And I said, "How about 6 minutes?" He goes, "Oh, well, maybe." It has been said that tears are for the washing away of grief. Hope is for the building of dreams. And love is the tender life force that conquers death. As we open ourselves to the mystery of divine love, may we experience life springing from death. There are many things in life we can't understand, even with the highest IQs. So we accept on faith. And it's the power of love that enables us not to succumb to bitterness or pointless questioning, but rather to grow to live life with more tenderness, more courage, and more purpose. It takes courage to celebrate a life like Kyle's, a life so well lived, so well loved, because for many gathered here today, there is still obviously abject pain and anguish that he's gone. And there are no words to describe the feeling of losing someone you love so deeply. Jesus said, "Blessed are those who mourn, for they shall be comforted." And that's what we're praying for all of you. You have lost someone who was a huge part of your lives, and it has left a gaping hole. In Matthew 11:28, we read Jesus urging, "Come to me, all who labor and are heavy laden, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and lowly in heart, and you will find rest for your souls, for my yoke is easy and my burden is light." Each of you will grieve in your own way. For some, the only way to express your sorrow is through tears. Completely okay. Some might still be in shock. Some might be angry, not ready for the tears. I get that. And for some, this is a somber time of reflection and quiet. Others will choose to keep busy with practical things until they're ready. Loved ones grieve differently. But regardless of how you grieve, grief isn't something you get over. It's something that you get through with time and love and comfort. the comfort of the Holy Spirit, and the comfort of those nearest and dearest right here. In other words, you're gathered here in Kyle's memory to lend comfort to each other, not only over the next few days and weeks and months, but for the next many years. And you can show that real love and support to those who are hurting the most. Revelation 21:4 says, "He will wipe away every tear from their eyes, and death shall be no more. Neither shall there be mourning, nor crying, nor pain anymore, for the former things have passed away." The psalmist assures us that God heals the brokenhearted and binds up their wounds. The Lord is near to the brokenhearted and saves the crushed in spirit. Nothing I say this afternoon will take away the pain of your loss or fill the hole that has been left in your lives. In one of Kyle's sermons, he wrote, and I quote, "Faith is about aspiring to be the best people we can be. It's about searching for and finding core values laid down by a power greater than ourselves. It's about embracing a loving God who created us along with everything else in the universe, who cares for us and who offers us love and hope and strength and courage to carry on through all the problems and travails of life." End quote. May those encouraging words from Kyle help you find the strength to bear the loss. And over time, may you all get to a place where you can celebrate and focus not so much on what you lost as what you have been given. Your lives have been forever shaped and impacted positively by the life and love that flowed through Kyle Brown. You've probably already experienced that grief doesn't come in an orderly fashion. And Chris knows, like a rogue wave, when you're out swimming, you got to keep your eye to the horizon. And just like that, grief can come and it can swell up and it can knock you down and force you to revisit the memories and the pain and the fear. And sometimes you might try to resist the demands of grieving because you'll long to avoid this fierce and yet holy pilgrimage. And I get that. And culture says, "Oh, get over it, move past it." But grieving can make those around us uncomfortable. And friends sometimes don't know what to do with the pain. Loved ones struggle to find adequate words to comfort the aching wounds. And yet grief, as painful as a season as it is a necessary part of our healing. Our grief has a purpose. Grieving is the process that God uses to bring us to a place, again, of wholeness. So I encourage you to give yourself space and time. Be honest with your emotions. Don't grieve alone. You have each other. Don't lose hope. There is no magic hatch to escape grief. You only can go through it and forward. Would you stand for our closing blessing? And now may the healing flow from sorrow. May hope emerge from darkness. May memories become even more precious in the mystery of God's love. And may the love which is stronger than death and which binds us together energize our spirits with divine comfort now and forevermore. Amen.